A child dies for a few minutes and returns with a divine revelation that defies human logic and moves even the most skeptical. During her brief passage to the other side, she claims to have visited a spiritual dimension where time did not exist, and everything was enveloped by a presence she described as the love of God. In this video, you will learn about this profound and inspiring story, which makes us reflect on life after death, the mysteries of God, and the power of true prayer. A real story that carries celestial teachings, reminds us of the importance of having a pure heart like a child, and calls us to awaken spiritually before it is too late. Prepare yourself for a journey between the visible and the invisible, where every word carries a divine purpose. Brian was only 6 years old. He was one of those boys who seemed to carry something special in his eyes, even without knowing it. The bright eyes, the lively curiosity, and the habit of asking questions that always left adults thinking. He lived with his parents in Marion, a small and quiet town in the interior of Illinois, United States. Marion has just over 10,000 inhabitants, quiet streets, houses with white picket fences, and churches that still ring bells on Sunday mornings. It's the kind of city where everyone knows each other by name, and where faith, passed down from generation to generation, is still a sacred value. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon. The blue sky was clear, the fresh spring wind was blowing lightly, and Brian was in the backyard playing with the family dog. Everything seemed normal, until suddenly he fell to the ground. He started to pant. His mother ran, calling his name. The father came right behind. Brian was breathless. His eyes were lost. His skin was starting to change color. It was a violent and rapid allergic reaction, one of those that takes you by surprise. Desperate, his parents rushed him to the local hospital. The mother, in the car, prayed without stopping. He said repeatedly, "Lord, don't take my son, protect him, please, Lord, listen to me." Upon arriving at the hospital, the situation was critical. Doctors acted quickly, but Brian's heart stopped. The devices confirmed. He went into cardiac arrest. There were minutes of anguish, of despair. The father couldn't sit still. The mother was shaking, holding the rosary in her hand, praying in a low voice. On the other side of the wall, the medical team was trying to revive the boy. It was 4 minutes and 37 seconds in which Brian's life, technically, had ceased. And it was in this silence, in this emptiness, that something extraordinary began. Minutes later, vital signs returned. Brian was back. The doctors breathed a sigh of relief, and the mother cried like never before. But it was just the beginning. The real impact would come in the following days. The next morning, Brian was awake, too calm for someone who had been through something so serious. The parents were at the bedside, still not believing what they were experiencing. It was then that he looked at the two of them and said, "I saw you, but from above. You were crying." The young man in the white clothes was screaming, "Not, but I wasn't afraid." At first, the parents thought it was imagination, but the more he talked, the more it became clear that wasn't the case. Brian described details of the room where he was treated, said what the doctors said even though he couldn't hear it, and mentioned things he could never have invented. And the way he said everything, with peace, clarity, left everyone silent. He didn't count as someone who dreamed. He reported it as someone who had been there. In the days that followed, Brian started talking about a place that, according to him, was full of light, but not ordinary light. It was an embracing light that made the heart feel warm inside. He spoke of a field that looked like heaven, where there was no shadow, no clock, no noise. "Nobody runs there, Mum. Nobody needs to rush there," he said. These words touched the mother deeply. She says that at that time she felt something in her chest, as if he was hearing something that wasn't just coming from his son, but from a much bigger place. The father, who had always been more skeptical, began to get restless. He was never one to pray, but that night he was silent for almost an hour in the next room. When he came out, he had red eyes. He just said, "There's something going on here, something that can't be explained." Brian continued talking naturally, as if remembering a trip, but with each sentence more and more questions arose. He said that in that place words were not spoken with the mouth. People spoke from the heart, and that, even without saying anything, he understood everything. He said there were beings there that glowed but had no face, that one of them walked beside him the entire time, holding his hand, never speaking, but that he felt completely safe. When Grandma went to visit Brian in the hospital, He said something that chilled everyone present. He held her hand, looked into her eyes and said, "I saw you there. You were praying for me. Your prayer was blue." No one understood what blue prayer meant. But the grandmother burst into tears because at the moment Brian was between life and death, she was actually kneeling at home, holding a blue rosary, an old family gift. Coincidence? Hallucination? Or is there really something that goes beyond our understanding? As the days passed, Brian demonstrated an unusual sensitivity. He began to pray before going to sleep with his hands on his chest, as if he felt something he needed to be grateful for. He asked for people who forgot to talk to God. He told his mother, "There are people who are sad because they think God doesn't listen anymore, but he does. But there are people who speak with their mouths but don't speak with their hearts." The mother wrote everything down, every sentence, every word, every gesture. He said he was afraid of forgetting, that maybe there was a bigger reason for all of this, that perhaps that boy had returned not only out of God's love for her, but for a greater purpose, and that this story needed to be told. The townspeople began to take notice. Close friends, neighbors, even the local church pastor came to visit Brian at home, and everyone left there moved. Some were crying. Others said they couldn't explain it, but they had felt something different in that environment, as if something invisible was there between the boy's words and his mother's eyes. There were no clear answers, but there was presence. There was faith. There was something being revealed there, albeit subtly. Something strange happens when someone dies, and comes back with a message that no one can explain. Some ignore it, others awaken, but whoever feels it knows. If you believe that life doesn't end here, that there is something bigger guiding everything, subscribe to the channel now. Leave a like too, because this video could be the spiritual answer someone has been waiting for, and you are part of it. That afternoon, while the doctors were still trying to save Brian, while his parents waited outside with tears and pleas, something silent and profound was happening to him. He no longer heard the sounds in the room, nor did he feel the weight of his body, nor even the touch of the devices on his skin. Everything started to disappear. Little by little, the noise became silence, fear became peace, and then everything changed. Brian said that at first he felt like he was coming out of himself, as if he were letting go of something tight, like heavy clothing that he suddenly no longer needed to carry. There was no pain, no scare. It was as if it was natural. He floated. He said he saw his own body lying motionless, surrounded by people dressed in white, running from one side to the other. He saw his mother crying in the hallway. He saw his father with his head down, with his hands on his face. And, even without understanding how, I knew what each of them was feeling at that moment. He couldn't say where he was exactly, but he knew he was no longer bound by gravity or time or pain. It was as if his spirit was free but completely conscious. He said he began to move away from the body, slowly, as if he were being carried upward, but without wind, without effort. He just went up in silence. I heard a sound, but it wasn't an ordinary sound. It was like a distant echo, a soft melody, like voices, but they didn't speak. It was as if they were singing prayers. And he said that that sound didn't come from outside, but from inside, as if the heart itself was singing along. I felt like I was being called, but not with words. It was stronger. It was as if love was pulling me, were his words. As he walked away from the room, Brian said everything around him began to change. The walls disappeared. The ceiling opened, but not literally. It was as if everything dissolved into light, a different light. It wasn't white, nor gold, nor blue. It was a living, pulsating mixture. He said the light seemed to breathe, that she had a life of her own, and for some reason, he didn't want to resist. I just wanted to go. The feeling, according to him, was one of absolute welcome. No fear, no doubt, just a feeling of being in the right place. A gentle heat touched his skin, but it didn't burn. It was like an armless hug, a caress that came from all sides, as if the air itself was saying, "You are safe." At that moment he began to realize that he was not alone. Still without seeing faces or defined figures, he felt presences, lots of, but they weren't people. They were consciences, energies, something he called beings that shine, and that seemed to move around him in no hurry, as if they were waiting for him. He said that these presences did not speak, but that he understood everything, as if their every thought was sent straight to your heart. Brian used simple words to describe this, but what he said carried a depth that was difficult to ignore. He said he knew he wasn't in heaven like in the drawings, but in a place that was before, a type of passage, a space between two worlds. And there, everything was made of love, not love like we feel here. It was a love that filled everything, that left no room for doubt or loneliness. There is no fear there. There we don't need to ask God to listen, because he is already listening before we even think, he said. He also said that the floor was not made of earth or stone. It was like a field of liquid light. Every step he took, even though he had no feet, caused gentle waves to spread beneath him. It was like walking on your own energy. The sounds continued, the same gentle melody, but sometimes he heard a kind of bell, a long, pure sound that made everything vibrate around it. When that sound came on, it was like the whole place smiled, he explained. The colors there were different, not the colors we know. It was as if everything was glowing from within. The trees, if they were trees, seemed to have their own light. They had roots that moved as if they were breathing. The paths did not lead to a specific place, but seemed to adapt to the thought. Brian said that all you had to do was want to go, and the path revealed itself. He didn't walk. He was carried, but not by anyone. It was as if the very desire to go was pushing him gently. All this he told without hesitation, without decorating, as if describing a very clear memory. And the most incredible thing is that when he spoke, Brian showed no pride or fear, just peace, a peace that is difficult to find in this world. During one of his conversations with his mother, he said something that made her shiver inside. He looked at her and said, "Mommy, in that place, I knew everything. But now that I've come back, I've forgotten almost everything. There are only a few parts left, only the ones I can tell you about." The mother asked what these parts were, and he responded with the ease of a child who is just telling the truth. The parts that will remind people that God is still here. Those words echoed in the house for days. Mum could barely sleep. The father spent long periods observing his son in silence. It was as if they were trying to understand what they were experiencing and how it could be possible. Brian didn't force the issue. He just spoke when he felt it. At one point he said he had seen a kind of window in the sky, and when he looked at her, he saw things that he didn't fully understand, but that made his heart tremble. When his mother asked what he felt there, he said, "Joy, but a joy so great that it makes you want to cry. There, we cry with love." And this was repeated. In the mornings, in the evenings, in the drawings, in the gestures, Brian seemed charged with something, an inner light, a different presence. He would wake up smiling, and before even getting out of bed, he would say a prayer in a low voice. Things like, "Thank you, God, for letting me come back. Help me remember what I have to do." The most impressive thing was that, no matter how much he told what he experienced, Brian never tried to explain or convince. He just said what he felt, as if he trusted that whoever needed to understand would understand, and that in itself was already something very profound. And now I ask, have you ever felt something similar? Have you ever had the feeling of leaving your body, of seeing things that cannot be explained, of feeling presences that cannot be seen with your eyes? Do you believe that there are spiritual dimensions that only the pure of heart can access? For days, Brian spoke about that place with the same serenity as someone recounting a happy memory, but with the intensity of someone who knows that it wasn't just a memory, it was a profound, spiritual experience, the kind that marks the soul in a way that doesn't go away. But there was one day in particular when everything changed. It was late afternoon. Sunlight streamed in through the bedroom window, with a softness that seemed suited to the moment. Brian was sitting on the bed, his eyes fixed on a spot no one else could see. The father came in and asked, "Are you okay, son?" He looked slowly, smiled, and said, "He came here again." The mother, who was listening from the door, felt a shiver run up her spine. Brian didn't talk about just any him. He spoke of that presence he felt in the other dimension, the same one that, according to him, didn't need to say anything to be understood. That late afternoon, for the first time, Brian began to tell more clearly what had really happened when he was between our world and the other. He said that after being surrounded by that living light and those luminous presences, he was taken to a space where everything was silence and sound at the same time, a place that seemed to breathe, a place where love was so strong that it became a kind of air, as if it were impossible to live there without being completely enveloped by it. He said that there was a part of this place where everything was even more intense, where the light not only shone, but seemed to vibrate with purpose. And it was in this space that he saw what he called the presence. He didn't know how to name it. I couldn't explain if it was a face, a voice, a shape, but I knew it was someone, and that someone was at the center of everything. It was as if that entire dimension revolved around him. And even without hearing words, Brian said he knew what was being said. It was as if this presence spoke to his heart, not with sentences, but with senses. With truths that cannot be explained, they can only be felt. He said that at that moment everything made sense. He understood things he didn't even know existed. He felt a clarity that no book or school could teach, as if, for a moment, his consciousness had been plunged into something eternal. And during this dive he realized that we are not here by chance, that everyone has a purpose, that each life is a mission, and that this mission is directly linked to love. But not romantic, fleeting love. It is divine love. He who heals, who transforms, who forgives, who sustains. Brian used a phrase that his parents never forgot. He said, "There, I understood that we need to remember who we were before forgetting." The mother asked, "Before you forget what, son?" And he replied, "Before we were born. Because when we come here, we forget that we already knew true love. There, no one forgets." It was as if he was talking about a home that the soul recognizes, even if the mind doesn't understand. This revelation deeply affected the parents, and also with his grandmother, who began to pray with the boy every day. They didn't know exactly what to make of it, but they knew it wasn't just a child's imagination. The words came with weight, wisely, with presence, as if, for brief moments, the sky had curved towards that room and left trails of light there. In one of the conversations, Brian said that he saw something like books made of light. He described that they were pages that floated and glowed, and that when he looked, he didn't read words. He felt stories. I felt lives, as if those lights contained everything that has already happened and everything that will happen. And when he touched one of those lights, he heard something that stuck inside him. Time is not what you think. Everything is happening at the same time. You just need to remember. When the mother heard this, she fell silent. The father got up and left the room, visibly shaken. It was too much information, but at the same time it was as if it were all familiar, as if the heart recognized an ancient truth hidden in new words. He also said that, at one point he was enveloped by something like a golden wave, an energy that permeated him completely. He described it as if it were a sea made of gentle heat, which entered through the feet and exited through the top of the head. There, we don't just feel with our body. There, we feel everything, he said. And he added, in this place, even silence has sound. And then came the hardest moment to describe, and perhaps the most important of all. Brian said that while he was in front of that presence, he felt something very strong. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't an order. It was a calling. A feeling that said, you need to go back. He did not hear this sentence with his ears, but with his heart. And even without fully understanding it, he accepted it. He said that as soon as he felt that, everything around him started to change. The light became softer. The heat began to turn into a breeze, and the presences, one by one, slowly moved away. But before it was all over, he said he heard one last thing, something he was unable to fully translate. I just said, it was as if someone reminded me that there are people who have forgotten how to love, and that I needed to tell them what I felt, to remind them. Those words changed everything for the family. The father began to pray with Brian every day. The mother began to write a spiritual diary. The grandmother, who always had faith, now said with tears in her eyes that God still speaks, yes, and he chooses the little ones so that the big ones can listen. Brian himself began to talk less, but in more depth. He said that some things were not to be said in a hurry, and that, with time, everything would come. Everything would be remembered. And now I want to talk to you, who has been watching this video so far. Tell me, have you ever felt like you were being called? Have you ever felt like there's something bigger trying to remind you of who you really are? Have you ever had a moment when everything was silent, and yet you heard something inside you? When someone goes through a near-death experience, they don't come back the same, and neither do those who listen. Did you feel that calling inside? He comments, love still calls me, and shares what he has experienced. It might be exactly what someone needs to read right now. Now take a deep breath. because what comes next continues to reveal a mystery beyond our understanding, and all of this is just beginning. There was such a great peace in Brian's eyes that, even without understanding everything, the parents knew he had brought something from there, something that could not be bought with nice words, nor could it be explained with theology or science. It was more than a near-death story. It was as if he had returned carrying a mission, even without knowing exactly what it was. And it was on one of those afternoons in silence, while the sun came in golden beams through the bedroom window, that he began to talk about what no one expected to hear. He was silent, looking at the ceiling, as if he was seeing through it. The mother entered slowly with a towel in her hands, but stopped at the door when she noticed the sacred silence that hovered there. The father stayed by the bed, as he had done every day since the incident. And then Brian said, his voice soft but firm, "He spoke to me, not with his voice and with his heart, and I understood." The father immediately bent down. The mother sat on the edge of the bed. Brian continued, "He told me that people are forgetting, that they are running too much, thinking too much, and loving too little. He said that time is different, that things are getting faster, and that we need to remember who we are." That sentence fell like a stone in the silence of the room. "We need to remember who we are." The mother held back crying, and the father looked at the floor as if trying to absorb every syllable. It was as if, at that moment, something opened within them, not to understand with the mind, but to feel with the spirit. Brian took a deep breath as if accessing memories stored somewhere deep. He said that there are many people who pray with just their mouths, but that he listens to those who pray with their hearts. And then he paused for a long time. The kind of pause that doesn't ask for a response, that just demands silence. He said he heard a kind of sound like soft knocks, but it didn't come from outside. It was like the sound of time running out, as if there was a clock that didn't tick, but slowly turned off the light, until everything disappeared. He explained that in that place where he was, time was not counted. It was felt, and that time here, where we are now, seemed to be hurried, as if something was pushing everything towards an end. But it's not a sad end, no, Mum. It's the end of one way, the beginning of another. The mother wrote everything down in a notebook, every sentence, every gesture, every detail. She said she shouldn't forget, because it seemed like that boy had come back with words that weren't just his. It was as if God was speaking through him, as if he was using the purity of a child's heart to awaken what was dormant in the hearts of adults. At another point, while holding a toy in his hands, Brian looked at his father and said, "He said that there are people who already heard the call, but they turned a deaf ear, and that these people will still have another chance. But they need to listen before it's too late." The father did not respond. He just passed his hand over his face, visibly moved. It was the first time he had heard that, and something inside him told him it wasn't just a warning, it was a request, a calling. I called for a spiritual return that is not done with steps, but with silence, surrender, and truth. Brian said that the light in that place had a mind of its own, and that she moved with the intention of showing the way. He said that before returning, he saw this light go out for a moment, and in that moment he felt scared. Not the common fear, but the fear of forgetting what you learned, what you felt, what you saw. And it was at that moment that he heard, deep in his heart, "You need to remember and make them remember too." That phrase stuck. The mother repeated it every day. The father started writing on loose sheets of paper, and the grandmother began to use it in prayers. Make them remember too. But remember what? Remember where they came from? Who are they from? What did they feel when they were little and believed that God could be found anywhere? Brian didn't explain. He just said, "We knew everything before we were born, but here we forget, and he wants us to remember again." He also said something that seemed simple but carried immense spiritual weight. He said, "The words that hurt here don't enter there. They stop. They die before crossing the light. That's why there, no one shouts, no one judges, no one points. Everyone understands before speaking." When the mother heard this, she closed her eyes and cried silently. It was as if that 6-year-old boy had seen a reality where everything humanity needs already exists, only forgotten, erased, hidden beneath the noise, the pride, the fear. He said that before he returned, he felt a gentle sadness. He didn't want to leave, but he couldn't resist, because there was a mission. Not a mission like in superhero movies, but a silent mission. A mission to remember and to tell. Little by little, he got back into his routine. I played, ate, watched cartoons. But sometimes I stopped everything, looked at the sky and smiled, and when they asked what it was, he replied, "He's here now." There was no fear. There was no doubt. There was only faith, pure, intense, silent. The faith that springs from a soul that has seen what is behind the veil. And now at this exact moment I ask you, are you listening to this by chance? Or is there something bigger calling you? Are these words echoing inside you because there is something you also need to remember? From that day on, Brian's house was never the same. Nothing in the routine changed drastically. The furniture was still in the same places. The school still sent assignments. The smell of food still filled the kitchen at dusk. But there was a presence there. An invisible change that touched everything. It was as if the experience that boy lived had left him a breath of the eternal hovering over simple things, as if, after what happened, even silence had more meaning. The mother, previously agitated with the rush of chores, began to retreat into small moments of silent prayer. Sometimes she would just sit and watch her son play. He looked as if he were trying to see beyond the flesh, as if he was looking for the reflection of something divine in every gesture. She said that she began to perceive details in more depth, the way the wind rustled the leaves, the way the sun touched the living room floor in the late afternoon, the way Brian closed his eyes before going to sleep, as if he was connecting to something the adults had forgotten. Her faith was no longer the same. Before, it was a routine, habitual faith. Now she was alive. He breathed with her. She said quietly, "I'm not afraid anymore. If God brought my son back, he's closer than I imagined." The father, this one, had a transformation that few could predict. He was a tough man, skeptical. He believed in effort, in logic, in work. It wasn't cold, but it was closed. Religious by education, but far from spirituality. Before, when I heard about life after death or supernatural experiences, I just listened respectfully and continued on my way. But after that, after seeing his son lying on a bed lifeless and then hearing him simply tell the things he experienced in another dimension, things that no adult could say without hesitating, something inside him broke. It started with silence, a different silence. He started staying up later, sitting on the porch, looking at the sky. He didn't say anything, just looked. Then came the first whispers. He prayed in thought, ashamed even of himself, like someone relearning how to talk to God. And then one night, Mum woke up and saw the light on in Brian's room. When he entered, he found the two kneeling side by side, the boy with his eyes closed, the father with his hands shaking and tears streaming down his face. They didn't say anything. They were just there, as if the simple gesture of kneeling was already a complete delivery. And at that moment, the mother understood. Her husband was no longer the same. And deep down, neither was she. The impact didn't stop with parents. The grandmother, a woman of prayer and unshakable faith, who from the beginning felt that this was something bigger, started to visit the house more frequently. He carried excerpts from the Bible, psalms, handwritten prayers. He said he wanted to be nearby, because there in that house God was speaking again. She herself said that, in more than 70 years of life, she had never felt the divine presence with such intensity as when she entered that home after the experience. "There's something here that didn't come from earth. There's a scent of heaven in this place," she repeated. Friends and neighbors also began to notice that something had changed. Visits became more frequent. Some people came just to see Brian, to hear what he had to say. And even when he didn't say anything, just being there in the same environment made many people say that they looked different. A neighbor said she went to visit them without expecting anything, but left with the desire to return to the church after years away. A teacher at the school, who was previously indifferent to the faith, asked to talk to the parents because the look in that boy's eyes seemed to know more than any adult. The reactions were always emotional. Some people were crying, others were silent. Still others seemed troubled, as if what they had seen or heard had shaken some ancient certainty. It was as if Brian had become a mirror of what many had lost within themselves, the connection with the sacred. And all of this happened without him seeking attention. Brian just lived. He played, smiled, asked questions like any child, but in moments of calm, he would blurt out phrases that to anyone paying attention sounded like revelations. Once, sitting in the backyard with his grandfather, he looked up at the sky and said, "Grandpa, did you know that God even hears the thoughts we have when we think no one is watching?" The grandfather, a simple man, hardened by life, did not know how to respond. He just lowered his head and let a tear fall. Those words had touched a deep place that he didn't even know existed anymore. Another time in the kitchen, while his mother was washing the dishes, Brian asked, "Mommy, when we love someone and they die, does the love go with them? Or does it return to God?" The mother stopped. He let the water run. He felt his eyes burning. "I think it returns to God, son, because everything that is pure returns to Him." And the boy replied, "So that's why I felt so much love there. It was the love of everyone who ever went." The mother could no longer speak. He sat down and cried. Not sadness, but a kind of emotion that comes when the soul recognizes an ancient truth, a truth that perhaps was always there, but that needed to be remembered by someone with a heart still cleansed of the world. The atmosphere in that house became different. There was more silence, but it was a light silence. There was more prayer, but without obligation. It was a home where spirituality manifested itself in simple things, in the way they set the table, in the way they looked at each other, in the small breaks of the day. It was as if there, the sky had left a crack open, through which light still entered every day. And now perhaps you who are watching this far are remembering someone you love. Maybe you are thinking about your child, your mother, your father, your grandfather. We all have someone who, if they left today, would leave a huge void. And maybe that's why this story is touching you so much, because it reminds us of something that the world tries to make us forget, that we are made of spirit, and the spirit never dies. That the love we feel for people is not earthly, it is not limited, He is eternal. And when we understand this, everything changes. The way we speak, how we listen, how we treat each other, even the way we pray changes. After everything that happened, after every word Brian said, after every silence filled with faith and emotion, it couldn't be like before. It was impossible to continue living with the same distraction as before. Because something within that family had awakened, and perhaps something within you is awakening now. Maybe you're not just hearing a story, maybe you're recognizing something that has been lying dormant inside for a long time, a memory, a sensation, an ancient faith, an unanswered question, or even a calling. And that's why now I want to talk to you, yes, with yourself on the other side. What have you felt so far? How did this story move you? Because stories like Brian's, as extraordinary as they are, touch us in a very intimate way. They don't just come to surprise and they come to remember. They come to provoke, to revive what, deep down, we have always known, but which busy life, the noise of the world and the pain of losses insist on silencing. Maybe hearing all this you remembered someone, from a family member, a friend, a child. Maybe you missed someone who left. Maybe you asked yourself, did he see something too? Did she try to tell me something before she left? Or maybe you've experienced something similar yourself, a dream, a moment of near death, an instant out of time, a spiritual encounter that no one believed in, but that you never forgot. And if this happened to you, I want to tell you something. You are not alone. There are a lot of people going through this in silence, people who carry within themselves transformative experiences, powerful messages, encounters with the invisible, but who never had the courage to tell them, because they were afraid of being judged, of seeming crazy, not to be taken seriously. But here you can talk. Here you can let your voice be heard. Because here, we understand that there are mysteries that reason cannot reach, but that the soul recognizes instantly. So I want to ask you a question, and I want you to answer honestly. Have you ever had a spiritual experience that left a deep impression on you? Have you ever felt like you left your body? Have you ever seen someone who wasn't here anymore? Have you ever dreamed of something so real that it seemed true? Have you ever prayed and felt a presence so strong that it made you cry without knowing why? Did you feel something touching you during this video? This is no coincidence. It's a calling. Something inside you knows that God still speaks, and that may have been the answer you were hoping for. It's part of it. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and walk with those who feel the same way. Here, you are not alone. Reaching the end of this story and feeling something awaken inside you is not common. It is spiritual. Whoever feels it knows. There is something bigger calling you, something that goes beyond logic. Write in the comments, I heard the voice of God. This phrase carries more than words. It shows that you are part of something sacred, and whoever reads it may be touched by the same call that reached you. And now, what comes next will shake everything you believe even more. A new story, real, intense, with something no one expected to hear. Click on the video that appears on your screen and continue on this journey. The more you feel, the more the invisible begins to reveal itself. See you there. May God bless you deeply.